You'll have to pardon my floatiness inside of a void for today's video. I'm on vacation, but that doesn't mean card updates stop. Let's go ahead and dive on in and talk about what these are and what I think they will mean for the Marvel Stat metagame, and then I'm getting back to a water slide. June 8th, happy Spider-Verse season. We've got 5 updates for you this week, including an update to a starter card. Ooh, let's hop in. Spider-Man being changed from a 4-3 to a 5-4. Same text box. Your opponents can't play cards this location next turn. Spider-Man performs very well in multiple decks like High Evolutionary Lockdown and Galactus. We want to avoid these kinds of playstyles being too powerful as they are frustrating to play against. So we decided to adjust Spider-Man to limit his play inside of combos such as Spider-Man into Professor X. While this does put him at the same cost as his lockdown peer, Professor X, we think that their effects are distinct enough that they can both sit at 5 cost. I like this change overall, and I really like the breakdown of why they're making it here. I wholeheartedly agree that lockdown style decks are ones that can be frustrating to play against, and I think kind of massaging them so they're maybe not necessarily the top of the metagame is ideal. I will say I do think it's partially a metagame consideration that lockdown decks are popular right now because Galactus is popular, and cards like Spider-Man and Professor X and Storm to a lesser degree are good into Galactus specifically. So while I think this change is fine, and I agree that Spider-Man and Professor X are distinct enough that they can both exist as 5 cost, I also think if we see a meaningful change to Galactus next week when we get a patch on the 13th, that could also reduce the popularity and prevalence of these lockdown control decks. Moving along here, we have an update to one of my personally favorite cards, and that is Mr. Beastly. So we're going from a 2-2 that bounces stuff and reduces their cost to a 3-4 bounces your stuff and reduce their costs. Let's read what they have to say. Bounce decks with cards like Kitty Pryde, Bast, and Hitmonkey are performing very well lately. Beast in particular stood out to us as a powerful enabler in that deck. We want Beast's effect to take more investment to get returns, so we're adjusting him to be a 3-cost card. This also helps give Falcon more room to spread his wings, as he often felt like a worse Beast without the cost reduction effect. I definitely agree with that last bit. As someone who's played a lot of both Beast and Falcon, Beast was generally the more powerful of these two effects, and they often had a lot of overlap in what they were doing. The big takeaway from this cost increase, and this is a pretty sizable change, even though they're doubling his power, going up a cost is a big deal, especially for a card like Beast where you're typically wanting to play him on curve with other things. The big call out in my mind is that you won't be able to play Kitty Pryde and Beast simultaneously until the 4th turn now, whereas quite commonly inside of Kitty Pryde Beast decks, you wanted the Kitty Pryde plus Beast on 3, so then you would have turns 4, 5, and 6 to have a free Kitty Pryde. Now you're only going to get 2 turns of free Kitty Pryde at most if you're beasting her back to your hand. Another thing where Beast will be a bit worse, they called out Hitmonkey. A very common play with Beast was to Hitmonkey plus Beast on turn 4. Pick your 2-power Hitmonkey back up to your hand, and then you have a 1-cost Hitmonkey with 2 points of stats already ready to go. You'll be able to set up something similar with Hitmonkey still, since it doesn't come back to your hand like Kitty Pryde does, where you could like play Hitmonkey plus a 1-drop on turn 3, and then you like another 1-drop plus Beast on turn 4, so that might still be fine. As much as I love the bounce decks, and Beast is one of my favorite cards in it, I do think this change makes sense. In the games where you're not getting waived playing the bounce deck or getting Sandmanded, it almost feels like you're playing a different game than your opponents. I think the bounce decks are a lot more powerful than their metagame representation shows, in part due to the fact that they have a lot of complicated sequencing decisions involved in them. So even though it makes me a little bit sad that they're making my baby a bit worse, it is worth noting that we are at least getting more stats, so it's technically a side grade, even if Beast is often going to be worse, but I don't know that I expect this to make Beast or the bounce decks unplayable. It'll just hopefully pull them a little bit more in line with the rest of the metagame. This next change, they're just like, we're going to adjust all of Jeff's favorite cards this week while he's on vacation and can't record videos with them right away. The Hood. going from a 1 -2 to a 1 -3. Many decks are able to take great advantage of the cheap 6-power demon while neutralizing the Hood's negative power. We're making a small nerf to Hood's power to make him more punishing to play if you're unable to counteract his base power. Notably, this is actually a buff to Viper decks that hand Hood over to the opponent to deal with. Yeah, I like this a lot. This is kind of reminiscent of the Nova change that we saw a little while ago where they reduced his base power from 2 down to 1. Like, a lot of decks that are playing Hood, like this is saying, you're either carnaging it or basting it, and in both of those situations, or killmongering it. In any of those situations, this Hood is exactly the same as before. However, this is adding a little bit more risk to the reward that you're getting with Hood, essentially. In the event that you don't have a way to fix what Hood has going on, you're going to take a bigger penalty. And I do think Viper was probably the weakest of the ways to address your Hood being problematic for you. And I like that that weakest way to address Hood's downside is now a little bit stronger with this change. I'm also a little bit biased in this opinion, almost assuredly, since I have a wonderfully gold split Viper and I played that card a ton. But all in all, I like this change too. Moving along to Rogue. Same text box as expected, getting an extra point of power. Similar vein to our Enchantress buffs, Rogue is a card we'd expect to see more of to counteract powerful ongoing effects. While we're not surprised that Enchantress is more popular with her high base power and more universal coverage in synergy with cards like Zabu and Lizard, we are surprised that Rogue performs poorly even inside of Silver Surfer decks. This is an interesting thing to call out here. So like, okay, it makes sense to us that Enchantress is more popular, but even in the spot where Rogue should be at her best inside of the niche, like this is where Rogue should really be performing well. She's struggling. So they're just giving her a small base power bump to hopefully make her a better tool for countering ongoing cards. I think this is an example of just like the perfect kind of change to be making via these over-the-air updates where they're just like looking at cards. They're like, oh, this tool is similar to this other one, but it's a lot worse in terms of the metrics. Let's just like bump it up a stat line to try and pull it in line with the other thing that it should be competing for a slot in. So even if it's not more popular than something like, say, Enchantress here, it can potentially at least be optimal inside of the niches where it should be optimal. Finally, looking at our change to a starter card here, this is kind of spicy. So Medusa here, going from on reveal at the middle location plus 2 power to on reveal middle location plus 3 power. Players move past many of the starter cards quickly, but most of them make a comeback in later archetypes. For example, we've seen Quicksilver featured in a Lockjaw deck. We also played it with Iron Lad. And Iron Man sees play an ongoing and Mr. Negative, and just recently High Evolutionary brought back all the vanilla cards. Medusa, however, stands out as a card that doesn't see play anywhere beyond the early stages of Snap. Even though she's consistently a 2/4, her restriction makes her weaker than she may seem. We're giving her a buff to allow her to compete with the other options in the 2-cost slot. So, noteworthy that Silk is releasing next week as a 2/5 that bounces around the board. They adjusted Lizard to be a, 1-power thing when its downside is on. We had Jeff the Baby Landshark added recently. Now Medusa is going to be a 2/5 when you play her out center. I think for a long time, the 2-cost slot in Marvel Snap was kind of the worst of the cards that you could play on Curve in terms of having variety in the cards that you could play there and feel good about it. And I feel like, especially with the addition of Silk and now this small change to Medusa, that's becoming less and less true. Ideally, we want to see, a few different cards in different deck lists depending on what they're looking to do in that 2-cost slot. And having a variety of cards that have upside in some spots and are worse in others is good just for deck building diversity in general. Closing out here with a final note that I think is worth calling out. So we have thanks for reading. We're continuing to keep a close eye on game balance and High Evolutionary in particular. See you next week for a new patch and the release of Conquest. So I think it's definitely too early to make any adjustments to anything High Evolutionary related. It was the biggest, most hype card Marvel Snap has released maybe ever. So it had a really high play rate for a little while in there, but it's been slowly coming back down to earth. I think if it sustains really high play rates and success rates over a longer period of time, it definitely warrants adjustment, but adjusting something just because it's a new shiny toy and seeing play against a new shiny toy makes a lot of sense, and it seems like Second Dinner agrees with that. We also get confirmation here that we're going to get a balance patch next week on likely Tuesday the 13th, assuming everything goes well. And that patch is going to be bringing with it Conquest, and hopefully Galactus changes. At any rate, I'm back off to enjoy the rest of my vacation with my family. As always, there's going to be daily content up here on the YouTube channel still. I got a lot of that edited in advance, so it could be ready and rearing to go. I appreciate everybody that tunes in every day. Snap the like button on this one if you enjoyed my breakdown, and we'll see you live again on Monday with a patch on Tuesday. Peace, folks.